Hi, Patty.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Good. Welcome to GalaxyCon Talks Comics. I am your host, Mike Broder, and my co-host, Patty Hawkins.
Hello out there in internet land.
Patty, I'll let you do the introductions today since you're good friends with these guys.
Absolutely. Well, where do you even begin? He's a writer of probably about every form of media in his resume. I could spend 20 minutes going down the credits, but I think the best way is the way he's described himself. Peter David, writer of stuff, and some of that stuff we are going to go into during our time here. Dude, bring him in.
And Kathleen, don't forget Kathleen.
Kathleen O'David, his lovely wife, one of my big sister from another mister.
Peter, Kathleen.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
Patty.
Well, nice talking to you.
We're out of here.
Hey!
Over.
Okay. Fine. We'll lead with it. So, how the two of you doing?
Well, I have to admit that being confined to the house and working here in my office, as opposed to typical days where I'm confined to the house and working in my office, is pretty much standard. My life hasn't really changed all that much, except I no longer have my bowling league to go out to. I can work out in the gym. But other than that, it's pretty much unaffected.
That's the fortunes of war, indeed. That some of us are able to do this. Like I said, Mike came up with the idea of bringing the convention experience to the internet, which is why we've gotten you here and a lot of our other guests. So, welcome to our virtual stage.
Happy to be here.
And speaking of conventions, you started going to conventions back in the day of the Phil Suling shows in New York.
Oh yes.
And probably around 71, 72. And
thereabouts. The first convention I went to, I think it was either 71 or 72. I remember that distinctly because Jack Kirby was a guest and the New Gods was pretty much just out there. And I remember going up to Jack and asking him, was the character's name pronounced Dark Side or Dark Seed? No, it seemed a viable question. And it's Dark Side. Yeah. I went, okay. But I will always remember sitting at home in Pennsylvania, watching the evening news with my dad, and they were covering the comic book convention. And my father saw me looking so longingly at the TV screen, and he said, would you like to go? And I looked at him and I was astounded. And I said, you take me? And he said, sure, why not? I mean, it was a several-hour drive from Pennsylvania to New York, but it wasn't anything, hideous and overwhelming. And the next day he drove me up there and I got to meet Jack for the first time.
Wow.
And your first convention experience is, you get to go meet Jack Kirby. So that's, that's not so bad.
Not at all.
And for whatever it's worth, for years I thought it was Dark Seed, so I absolutely did.
I got the pronunciation from the man.
There you go, and it has been long since ratified and canonized. So that argument's been put to bed finally.
Well, I believe the creators should be able to do the pronunciation of the characters.
Yes,
I mean I hear people going Ra's al Ghul, and I'll go, no, it's Ra's al Ghul. I know this because Denny O'Neil said so. That kind of thing. It's Mxyzptlk. I know that because DC Comics told me that because I wrote a letter to them and they sent back a standardized list of frequently asked questions that they had answers to. So Mxyzptlk was like number one on the list.
So hang on. So Mxyzptlk?
Mxyzptlk.
Mxyzptlk. Okay.
Yeah. I still remember I was going to a convention in Oregon, and I was with a handler, and we were walking towards the convention center. And this kid, he was about 13 years old, comes running up to me. He says, is it Bill Sienkiewicz? And I said, no, it's Bill Sienkiewicz. And he goes, and it's Fabian. And I said, it's Fabian. And he said, and is it Submariner? And I said, no, it's Submariner. And he said, okay, thanks. And I said, about to go away, about to leave. I say, oh, by the way, a lot of people don't know this. It's pronounced Moonknicket. And he went, what? And I said, the superhero is Moonknicket. And he said, I thought it was Moon Knight. And I said, you're forgetting that he's Egyptian. And Egyptian pronunciation. And he went, wow, that's really interesting. And he goes running away. And my companion says, you are evil. And I said, oh, just wait. Because sure enough, he ran to a group of kids and he was clearly the messenger. And I could see when he got to the part about Moon Knight, because the kids are going like this. He's pointing at me like he told me this. Yeah, so never ask me how to pronounce things, because depending if I'm in a mood, I may tell you accurately or I can screw with it.
Well, I will tell you this: when I was running a store during the New Universe days, I did have a kid come in and ask me, "Did they have the latest issue of Chivistus?" I was like, "What? Chivistus? You mean justice? No, it's Chivistus because it's got a V." I was like. I wasn't gonna correct a kid who wanted to buy the book, but
hey, look, when I was a little kid, when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I thought the character's name was Aquaman. And I told my father, I mentioned this character Aquaman to my father, and he said, "What?" And I said, Aquaman. He said, "How do you spell that?" And I went, A-Q-U-A, and he said, "No, that's Aquaman." And I went, oh, okay, because I didn't know the term aqua.
Now these kids today, they got pronunciation guys. They can go online. They can see it. They're all good too. All these classic old fan arguments are moot.
Yep, pretty much.
That's okay. We found more things to be angry about, but enough about Twitter.
Thomas Price wants to know if I ever wrote a fourth Apropos novel. Yes, I did. It was called Pyramid Schemes. It was published by Crazy 8 Press, and you could go to Amazon, enter Pyramid Schemes, and buy it right now.
Wow. So that you were already reading comics and into the whole scene, and we all know certainly you were a big Star Trek fan.
Yes.
I especially enjoyed the tale of was Takei your very first one?
Sorry,
Takei. Was George at your very first show? First Trek show you went to?
Yes, I met him at my very first show. I actually had a signed poster of Sulu up on my bedroom door when I was like 16 years old. If you could have told 16-year-old me that 45 years later I would be at George Takei's wedding, I would have been like, what? So, but yeah, I met George Takei at the first Star Trek that I went to.
And you clearly into other science fiction as well.
Yes.
So you were running the gamut. So what were you reading? Asimov, Heinlein, that kind of stuff?
Yes, exactly. Oh, yeah, I was reading Asimov. I was reading Heinlein. I was reading Ellison, Arthur C. Clarke. Pretty much every classic science fiction and fantasy writer you can think of. Fritz Lieber, Robert Bloch. I mean, pretty much everybody.
So in 1974, you went to the World Science Fiction Convention.
Yes, it was it was in Washington, D.C. Right. I covered it. My father was a reporter, and he was working for the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin, now defunct. And I covered the convention on behalf of the Evening Bulletin. My father got me press credentials.
Nice. Press badge. That helps.
That can be very helpful, yeah. It was interesting because I went to the convention and I was in the press room. Or what was doubling as the press room was really Convention Central. And I was going over the list of people I wanted to talk to do interviews with. And I said I was interested in talking to Roger Zelazny and one or two other people. And I said I also like to talk to Harlan Ellison. And at that very moment, a voice shouted, "Gangway!" And this small miniature blur came charging through the room, almost knocked me on my ass as it dashed past. And I said, who the hell was that? And they started laughing, and they said, that was Harlan Ellison. And 40 years later, he was the best man at my wedding. So, with George Takei.
Wish George Takei was there.
Yeah.
Now, did you get to talk to Harlan at that show?
No, I did not. He was way too busy. I got to watch him at a screening of A Boy and His Dog, but I never got the chance to interview him then.
So when's the first time you got to actually talk to Harlan?
The first time I ever spoke to Harlan was, okay, this requires a little bit of setup. I had been attending the San Diego Comic-Con, and I saw a number of people carrying around a copy of a newly released book, The Essential Ellison. And I said to everybody who I saw carrying, and I said, could you have lived without that book? And every single person said no. And I thought, wow, I guess it's really essential. Some months later, Comic Buyer's Guide, the newspaper for whom I wrote But I Digress, asked me and all the other contributors to do Christmas lists. And I put in my Christmas list that you should get Essential Ellison. And I related my encounters at San Diego. And I said, you really apparently cannot live without this book. So that would be a perfect Christmas present. And I come home from work after it comes out, and there's a message on my message machine. And it's from Harlan, and he is proposing marriage for my having visibly promoted Essential Ellison. And I have no idea how he got my phone number. I assume he got it from Maggie Thompson. And he left his phone number, and I called him back, and that's how our friendship started.
Wow.
And then it blossomed as the years went by.
And so this would be the 80s?
Yeah. Well, it's whenever the Essential Ellison came out. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Wow. Was it? Too bad those machines back then. You couldn't have kept that. That would have been lovely to hear.
No. I kept it on. It was on a little micro cassette recorder.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I probably took the micro cassette recorder and stuffed it in my file drawer and put it in a new one. I mean,
all right.
I probably can't. God knows where it is now, and I doubt it's
trying to play it. Having the physical mechanism to play some of these things.
You send it to me. I got friends in the audio business. They'll decipher it. They'll clean it up. They'll digitize it. Get it back to you.
Okay.
Desk drawer.
Yeah, really.
Title that desk drawer. So when did you hook up at Marvel?
Like something like around 1980, 1981. What happened was I was hired by Comic Scene to do an article about the direct comic book market. I was actually working in sales at the time for Playboy paperbacks, which was a really, despite the name of it, was really a very legitimate publishing arm. We published top authors like Morgan Llewellyn, Ann Tyler, who wrote The Accidental Tourist. I mean, it was a really legitimate outfit. And so Bob Greenberger, who was the editor of Comic Scene at the time, hired me to do an article about the direct sales. And I interviewed all the various direct sales people. And Carol at the time was the assistant direct sales manager to Mike Friedrich. And I came in and I interviewed Carol, and we talked for something like 3 hours. We talked until our voices were hoarse. And at the end of it, Carol said to me, how are you able to get off work? Because I come into the interview around 3:00 in the afternoon. And she said, how are you able to get off work to come to this interview? And I said, well, Playboy paperbacks is being sold, which it was. And everyone is going to be fired, and we're all going to be out of work in about a month. So I told my boss that I have an interview, and he kind of assumed there was a job interview and said, okay, good luck. And she said, you're going to be out of the job? And I said, yeah. And she says, I'm being promoted to direct sales manager in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to need an assistant. tell me about yourself, which I did. And she said, I'd like to have you come back for a more formal interview. And I contacted Bob Greenberger and told him the situation. And I said, would it be inappropriate for me to now write the article? And he said, can you write an article without overly favoring Marvel? I said, sure, that's not a problem. And he said, okay, write the article and just get it into me before you go in for the interview. And I said, fine, which is exactly what I did. And I came back a couple of weeks later, and I was wearing my suit. And Carol is sitting behind her desk putting together a model kit. And I said, is that a pterodactyl? And she says, no, it's Rodan. And she proceeded to tell me all about Rodan. And as she did so, she reached across her desk to pick up a model piece. And she was on a wheeled chair, like the one that Kathleen's.
No, the one you're on.
Like the one I'm on. And she reached across the desk, and the chair flew out from under her, and she hit the floor. And she climbed back up to the onto the chair, sat there, put her hands like that, and said, so, why do you want to work in Marvel Comics? And given the ludicrousness of the situation, I said, do you see this suit? This is a winter suit. And it is the only suit I own. And if I have to go for more interviews next month, I'm going to have to buy a summer suit because I can't wear this winter suit in the summer. Yeah. And I really don't want to have to go buy another suit. And she said, that's a great answer. Oh, let me introduce you to Ed Shukin. And I wound up becoming her assistant.
Wow.
And that's how my career in comic books started.
So you're in the wild west of comic book retail, right? You're dealing with guys who don't have cash registers. You're dealing with, bookstores that, are selling some comics on the side.
Yeah.
You're dealing with fans who had collected that are, and this is, I think you probably had God knows how many distributors. Suing was distributing.
When we had our maximum, if I'm recalling correctly, I think our maximum was 23. We had our baseline was about 18. Eventually, of course, all of them went away with the exception of Diamond. So the industry became what was the one thing Carol never wanted it to be, which is a monopoly. But yeah, at the time when I started, we had 18 and we expanded it to 23.
But you guys really were there at the the cusp of the industry growing up and and being an industry getting off the newsstand.
I know that's absolutely correct.
So I don't know, how do I phrase this? Did you see the newsstands as that they were eventually going to go away like they did, and as and that we're going to end up just really in the direct market?
We felt that the direct market was the future of comics because it got the comics out there. We did endeavor to expand the line, though, beyond the direct sales market. That's why, Marvel Comics and DC together were the first ones to get comic books into Barnes & Noble, Borders at the time, pretty much
my alma mater.
Yeah, every major Walden Books. Yeah, that's right, Walden Books. We got them into the bookstores, and this was before the time of trade paperbacks. Now we're accustomed to going into a Barnes & Noble and seeing an entire massive shelf of graphic novels and trade paperbacks, but they didn't exist in the same way that they do now back then. And we managed to actually get comic book spinner racks into the mainstream bookstores as a way of trying to get the comic books in front of additional lines. Because if you just had comic book stores, all you're going to do is recycle the existing audience. Expecting kids to discover comic book only stores is problematic. What you needed to do was get the comic books out into places where the kids would run into them because mom and dad happened to bring them there looking for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to keep them. I mean, if they were seeming less popular in 7-Elevens, we had to get them somewhere else, and bookstores seemed to be the reasonable alternative.
I've talked to I talked to Shooter about this, and he seemed to indicate that the powers that be above him really saw the direct market as a cash cow, and really wanted to pull out of the newsstand, for any various reasons, the returnability, the distribution issues they were having, and that you guys all had to fight to hold on to the newsstand as long as you did, and to find other methods of getting the books out.
Well, if they were trying to pull out the newsstand, that was happening above my pay grade. I mean, Ed Shukin, who was the boss of of my department, Carol worked under him. He came up through the ranks of ID wholesalers, independent wholesalers, and he was not the slightest bit interested in leaving that behind. He saw the wholesalers and the independent distributors as what he called reader breeders. That they were the ones who let the fans know that comic books existed. I mean, a lot of people didn't know that. I mean, when I was a kid, I found out comic books existed because I would watch every day at 4:30 on Channel 11 the Superman TV series with George Reeves. And if you remember, the announcer said at the end of the show, Superman is based on the character appearing in Superman magazines. And this, of course, was before DVRs and videotape and DVDs and all that stuff. If I wanted to experience a Superman adventure, the only time I could do it was 4:30. The prospect of a Superman magazine was very attractive to me, because it meant I wanted to see an adventure. I could crack the magazine and read it again at my leisure. And indeed, many, many, many years later, I was in a comic book store, and this kid wanders in with his mother. And the kid's looking at the comics, and the kid says, "Mom, look, they have comic books of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, too." Kid did not know that there was a comic book series called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, whence the TV series had sprung. Yeah. To him, just a TV series. He had no idea that it had come out as a black and white comic book some years earlier, and was, when it first came out, an extremely pricey first issue, because they only get 3,000 copies of it.
Oh yeah,
Laird couldn't afford. So making fans aware that comic book exists is a problem that goes on to this day. I mean, some years ago, I was taking my daughter Caroline, who at the time was something like 4 or 5 years old, to a local playground. And I saw that there were kids who were running around wearing Captain America t-shirts and Spider-Man sneakers and Spider-Man jackets. And I started having conversations with the kid, because when you're a middle-aged man walking up and talking to 5-year-old children on a who could possibly think there's something wrong there? And I'd say to the kids, "Do you like Spider-Man?" They go, "Oh yeah, we love Spider-Man." And I say, "Do you read the comics?" And they look at me like I was out of my mind. And they go, "No, we play the video games. We watch the movie. We watch the cartoon series." They would experience Spider-Man in every single way except the way in which the character was first introduced. Yeah. When I was that age, if I wanted to experience Spider-Man, I could only read the comic book. Not anymore. You can be a fan of comic books and never crack open a comic book. I mean, Avengers makes over $1 billion, but that's the movies. Do you think that translates to comic books? No.
Well, the biggest crime is it's what you pointed out about Superman. At the end of the Superman shows, hey, go pick up the Superman magazines by national periodicals.
Yeah,
they don't do that for the Avengers movies. They don't do that in the Spider-Man cartoons. They don't. You watch Harley Quinn on on
DC.
you don't get an ad to go read the comic in comic stores, and that's a shame.
CW, over half their programming is DC characters. You don't see them at the end of Stargirl going, Stargirl is based on the character appearing in Stargirl magazines. Why not?
No, and Stargirl's a great show written by people who created the character for the comics.
Yeah.
But you'd never know.
No.
You'd never know.
Like what was the one Max did?
Road to Perdition?
Yeah.
Yeah, Road to Perdition was a free Oscar nominated.
Oh, yeah, Max's book.
Yeah.
Based on a comic book.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear what happened when Al was hired to novelize it?
No.
Oh, yeah. Al Collins was hired to novelize The Road to Perdition. And the thing was, there was lots of backstory and character stuff that he did not have room to do in the original graphic novel. So he put it all into the novel. And they sent the manuscript off to the movie producers. And they came back and said, you have to take out all this extra stuff. And they said, what do you mean we have to take out the extra stuff? They said, none of this stuff is in the movie. And the publisher said, yeah, but the guy who wrote the novelization wrote the comic book upon which your movie is based. So he should know these characters. And they said, we don't care. If it's not in our script, we don't want it in the book. And poor Al had to go through and gut his novelization of Road to Perdition.
I really want to read his original.
His original
His
original manuscript was 90,000 words. The final version of the manuscript, 55,000 words.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, it was completely nuts.
That's foul. That is.
Well, I always think of what Alan Dean Foster said, which is that if you write a really great novelization of a screenplay, they call you a very talented hack. If you write a very good movie of a novel, they give you an Oscar.
Well, Peter, you did write the novelization of Batman Forever.
I did. I wrote Batman Forever. I wrote Battleship. I wrote The Return of Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
Return of Swamp Thing was my first one. And they sent me the screenplay. Back in those days, they sent you the screenplay.
Yeah.
And I'm reading through the screenplay, and by page 50, I'm bleeding out my eyeball. And I finished this thing, and I said, okay, I've got two choices here. I can either just write he said, she said, and not have my name on this thing, or I need to fix this. And I decided to fix it because I didn't know you weren't supposed to do that as a novelist. I didn't know that you had to give credit, you had to give priority to remaining faithful to the movie.
Yeah.
And I completely rewrote it. I left out scenes that were just too stupid to live. I fixed the scenes that were necessary for the plot. I completely changed the ending. I wound up using the ending of one issue of something that Alan Moore wrote, the one where he turns himself into an entire mountainside.
Yeah.
And I sent that off to the publisher, who sent it off to Michael Uslan, the producer of the film. And Michael could have scrapped the entire manuscript. Instead, he read it and said, wow, I wish we'd filmed this. And some months later, when the movie comes out, they're doing DC Comics is doing a Q&A at a convention. And a fan question came up of, The Return of Swamp Thing. What the hell? And Bob Greenberger responded very succinctly with 6 words. He said, skip the movie, read the book. So, and I've done, God, over a dozen novelizations.
I'd say that was quite a sideline for you for the 90s and double aughts.
Yeah, they seem to have stopped doing novelizations.
For adults.
for adults. I think part of the problem is that with the rise of the internet, I mean, you see, the thing is that novelizations will always come out about 6 weeks before the movie does. Now, before the internet came out, if you bought the novelization and then read what happened, okay, you read what happened. In the day and age of the internet, if you put out your novel, if you put out a novelization 6 weeks before the movie comes out, then 5 weeks and 6 days before your movie comes out, you're going to start seeing complete summarizations of everything that happened in your movie going everywhere on the internet. And they, the producers don't want to blow their movies.
Yeah, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You read that novelization, which came out, almost 2 months before the movie.
Yeah.
That Spock dies, spoiler, at the end.
I shot myself in the foot by reading the comic novelization of Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, geez.
Well, with the YA stuff, what I've noticed is they stop the movie right before the climax.
Yeah.
A lot of them stop right before whatever the last act is.
The first YA novelization I ever read was the one of the first Thor movie. It ended with Thor confronting the Destroyer. It didn't have what happened. It didn't have the climax battling the Destroyer. It didn't have the sequence of them fighting Loki. It didn't have any of that stuff. Yeah. Oh,
fascinating.
Star Wars before. I was working in the direct sales department when we distributed Return of the Jedi. And Mark Hamill bought it in a comic book store 2 weeks before the movie was supposed to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And he read it and immediately called George Lucas and said, this comic book reveals that Luke and Leia are brother and sister. And Lucas had an absolute shit fit. And he called Marvel, and Carol Kalish comes into my office and says, you need to go around to every comic book store in New York and get them to take the comic down, because the on sale date was actually 2 weeks later.
Oh.
Well, the thing is that we never really paid any attention to the on sale date. Not the retailers. When they got the comic books in, they put them right out.
Yeah.
So our coverage with Lucas was, hey, our on sale date was 2 weeks from now. We can't help it that retailers screwed around with the on sale date. But Carol said I had to go to every comic book store in New York and tell them to take it down.
Oh, my God.
Because Mark Hamill lived in New York. So I said, okay. And I would go around to the comic book stores and we would have the exact same conversation. I'd say, I tell them what it was, and I'd say, I need you to take Return of the Jedi off the rack. He said, but it's my comic book to put up and sell. And I said, my job is to make sure you take them off the rack. And the retailer would go, and what happens if I then put them up after you walk out? And I said, how would I know that? All I know is that I'll be able to tell my boss I saw him take them off the shelf. And he'd go, okay. He'd reach over, take them off, and put them behind the register. I'd go, thank you. And I'd walk out. And I knew that like 5 seconds later, they were going to be right back up. But hey, at least I did my job.
Did your job.
I did the job. The funny thing was, rumors were flying around that 10 people had been fired over this happening. 10 people. Now, keep in mind that at that point, the direct sales department consisted of me, Carol, my assistant, Sandy Schechter, and Fred Bauman, who was our clerk. So that's 4, right? If they fired Ed Shukin, that would be 5. We'd still have 5 more people, so they would have had to start firing people in subscriptions. In point of fact, nobody was fired over it. We took a black eye over it, and then the movie came out, and it was usually successful. And because this is pre-internet, fortunately enough, it didn't
go that far.
It didn't. No, wait, I take it back. The newspapers picked up on it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Say it got out, but still wasn't that everybody all at once thing that the internet would have today.
I mean, the thing is, to me, it was no surprise because I actually predicted it. I wrote a sketch for a convention called Farpoint, in which
was it an August Party?
No, you're right. It was August Party. It was for a convention called August Party. We always wrote sketches that were done skits, and I wrote one that it was set after The Empire Strikes Back, and we had Luke Skywalker waking up in Tatooine, and Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru were there, and he's going, "I had the craziest dream," and we had Han and Chewie and Darth Vader and Leia standing there, and he says, "And you were in it, Han, and you Chewie, and you Dad, and you too, sis." And the audience we heard the audience go, "Sis?" Because this was 2 years before we Jedi. And I had thrown it in just because I thought it'd be a good joke. I had no idea I was accurate. Oh, the funny thing was, when they re-released Empire Strikes Back some years later, I always remember sitting in the audience, and when Leia kisses Luke, everyone in the theater goes, "Ew." Yeah.
And they should have told Alan Dean Foster.
Yeah.
Before he wrote Splinter in the Mind's Eye.
Yeah, that would have been pretty good. When I went to see Empire at that re-release, at one point when Luke gets to Bespin, right?
Yeah.
When Luke arrives in Bespin, Leia yells, "Luke, it's a trap!" And I yelled back at the screen, "It's a what?" And she goes, "A trap!" And I went, "Thank you." It's just awesome.
That's almost as good as your Titanic gag.
Yeah, Mike, do you know the Titanic story?
I don't.
My sister Beth and I went to go see Titanic in our local theater. And this was back in the days when we got times from newspapers.
Right.
And the newspaper times were wrong. And we got there 20 minutes late. The Titanic was just leaving the dock. And so we had no idea what the setup story was, but we figured, well, the Titanic is just leaving the dock. We couldn't have missed too much. So we watched Titanic, and then we started seeing the cutaway scenes, and we went, okay, there's obviously a framing device here. And we saw the movie, and then it was done. And I said to Beth, "Let's stay here and see the beginning." He said, "Yeah, okay." So we sat there for the next show. We watched the first 20 minutes. We get up to leave. And people were sitting back of us going, "Where are you going?" And I said, "The ship sinks. Why should we sit here? We're taking nothing away. They told us it sinks. What is the point of this?" And the guy says, "Yeah, the Titanic sinks." I said, "I know. I just saw it happen. It's at the bottom of the ocean." And we walk out, and we come out, and there's like a ticket taker's there, and he says, an usher, and he says, "Sir, is there a problem?" And now I can speak with my full voice, and I go, "Yeah, damn right, there's a problem. The ship sinks. They give it away in the first 20 minutes." And my sister, playing right along with it, says, "But you saw the commercials." And I said, "Yeah, but I figured Cameron would pull some sort of save. I didn't think the ship was actually going to sing. Why should I sit there and watch a 3-hour movie where they give the ending away in the first 20 minutes?" And the ticket taker's like, "What?" And he says, "Sir, it's the Titanic. Everyone knows it sinks." And I said, "Of course everyone knows. They just saw it in the first 20 minutes. And I turned and I said, "I'm never letting you pick another movie." And I tore it out there. Now, Harlan Ellison later retold that story.
More than once,
except he said it in Times Square. This was actually out in Long Island. He said it in Times Square, and in his version, no, nothing's like in Times Square. And in his version, I almost set out for Race Riot. Now, why Harlan decided to make it much more insane than it really was.
Oh, and that I was there.
Idea. Oh, and then you were there. Yeah. Beth became Kathleen in that time. God, but yeah,
because we all know there's no love lost between Harlan and Mr. Cameron.
Well, that's certainly true. Yeah, that's certainly true.
So I wouldn't put it past it all. So you were misbehaving, spoiling Star Wars for everybody. What? How are you working your way to talking to the guys in the editorial level? Say, hey guys, I can write. Just saying. I mean, how'd that come about?
Well, I was pitching to editors every now and then and getting absolutely nowhere because there was no love lost between editorial and direct sales. Most of them didn't like Carol. Since I worked for Carol, they didn't like me.
Why didn't they like Carol?
She said no.
Yeah, well, she said no. If something was a bad idea, she would go, "That's a bad idea."
Okay.
Jim Shooter could do 15 minutes on why I hated Carol. Now, there was a young editor out in there named Jim Owsley. He was Larry Hama's assistant. Now, Jim was an angry young black man. The reason I say that is because it's very much relevant to this story. Because when people would come into the office, Jim would say, and they'd say, "Is Larry here?" And if he wasn't, Jim would say, "No, he's not here. Can I help you?" And they would immediately go, "No," and they'd walk out. And Jim assumed it was because he was black. The reason I say this is because he told me this several times. Was it because he was black? I really don't think so. But, if anything about modern day can establish something, it's what the hell do I, a middle-aged white Jew, know about this stuff? So this was Jim's view of the world. Now, if I walked in and said, "Is Larry here?" and he said, "No, can I help you?" I'd say, "Sure." And I'd ask him whatever it was that I needed because I didn't give a damn about skin color. I had deadlines. So, if Jim was there and he could answer my question, I was perfectly happy with that. So I made a huge positive impression on Owsley. Flash forward some months later, and Jim has been made a full editor. And he's been given Spider-Man, our flagship character. And people are now coming to him, anxious to talk to him about writing Spider-Man. All the people who Jim felt never had time for him now want his time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's having a great time blowing them off. In walks Peter David. Now, you have to understand that, again, there was really no interest in hiring me because I was in direct sales. Editorial's logic in these things was very simple. If you were creative, you worked in editorial. If you worked in something other than editorial, you weren't creative. Because if you were creative, you worked in editorial. Nice, simple chain of logic. So in walks Peter David, who no editor is interested in talking to. I said, "I have an idea for a Spider-Man story." Jim says, "Close the door." And I went, "Okay." And he goes, "Sit down. So tell me about your idea for a Spider-Man story." And I said, "What would you think if we did an updating of Leopold and Loeb?" And he said, "Who's that?" And first I had to explain to him who Leopold and Loeb were, which I'm not going to bother to do right now. If you guys want to go on Google, go right ahead. And that became my first Spider-Man story. And Jim really liked it. And he started assigning me some other stories for Spectacular Spider-Man. And then he fired Al Milgrom off of Peter Parker and gave me the book, which was a very unpopular move as far as editorial was concerned, because Al is a very sweet guy, and everyone in editorial loved Al Milgrom. The fact that he was fired off the book to make way for this unimaginative shock from direct sales did not go down very well with editorial. Indeed, many of them were convinced that I was not writing the stories, that Owsley was heavily rewriting them, because no one from direct sales could possibly write stories that were being that well received and be that good. It had to be that Owsley was heavily rewriting them. And a year later, Owsley wound up firing Walt for Spider-Man, pretty much in order to save his job. Shooter hated me writing the book. The feeling among among editorial in general and Shooter in specific was that Spider-Man was, that Spider-Man was not a book that you got assigned to with absolutely no prior experience. He was our flagship character, the guy who you had to work your way up to. You didn't get to just start him, which is why it broke me up when in modern day, people were howling because J.J. Abrams' son was going to be writing a Spider-Man limited series.
Yes.
Modern day fans are going, no, that's a character that you work your way up to. Just as editorial was saying about that Peter David schmuck. And he fired me off the title. And Carol came into my office shortly after Owsley, and she had something she needed me to do, but she saw that I was sitting there looking very depressed, and she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Owsley just fired me off of Peter Parker." Now, you have to understand that Carol wasn't thrilled about me writing Spectacular Spider-Man either. She really kind of liked that there was a division between editorial and sales. But when she saw how devastated I was, she said, "Drop whatever you're doing. We're going out to lunch." And she took me out to lunch and spent the entire lunch trying to come up with ways to get me back on Spider-Man, because she saw how much it meant to me. And I had to talk to her and tell her, no, there's really nothing that we could do. Some months later, Bob Harris walks into my office and he says, "I want to talk to you about writing Hulk." And the first thing I said was, "Come back after 5:00, because right now I'm on sales time and I don't want to talk editorial while I'm on sales time," because even I knew I had to keep that division. So he came back after 5:00 and he said, "Would you be interested in writing Hulk?" Now, I wasn't writing. What the hell? Look, Patty. What the hell?
Oh, is that are that the Davids?
The Davids?
The Davids?
Davids?
Wow. Hi.
To our audience, I just let everybody know these are my housemates, Graham and Emily, and it is through them that I met Peter David a couple of years ago. Graham was a performer at the Adventurers Club at Walt Disney World for several years.
I actually mentioned that, okay, this is going to be a totally new story. I'll come back to the Carol. I'll come back to the Hulk later. I wanted to propose to Kathleen at the Adventurers Club in Disney. The Adventurers Club is now long gone, which I still think is one of the dumbest decisions.
So stupid.
But I wanted to propose to her at the Adventurers Club. The reason I wanted to do it was that if I proposed to her at the Magic Castle, that was a $300 thing, which I really didn't want to have to pay $300. And also, since I was coming off of a broken marriage, my attitude. What, Caroline? Want to step in the camera?
Oh, okay. She did.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. That's my daughter, Caroline.
Caroline.
My feeling was that marriages were not a thing of fantasy. Marriages were an adventure. So therefore, I should propose to the Adventurers Club. Also, the Adventurers Club had some large puppets. One was named the Colonel. The other was a giant. What was her name?
Babylonia.
Babylonia was this giant mask. And I wanted to have Babylonia propose to Kathleen on my behalf, because Kathleen was a puppeteer.
Is a puppeteer.
Is a puppeteer. Will always be a puppeteer.
And I thought,
She's operating Caroline right now.
how better to propose to a puppeteer by a writer than have a writer write a proposal for a puppet to read? So I contacted the Adventure. I contacted Disney, and they said, well, we don't have a program for proposal at the Adventurers Club, but here, you can speak to Bill Shepard. Bill Shepard was the stage manager?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Stage manager. So they put me in touch with Bill Shepard, and I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, it would actually be better if you had the Colonel do the proposal than Babylonia. And I said, okay. I wrote the script and I sent it off to the Adventurers Club. Now, Graham, you told me that you guys got the script, right? That you heard it was from Peter David and you wondered, is it me?
Yes. Is it the Peter David? Yes. And lo and behold, it was.
So Bill told me that I had to make contact when I arrived with a guy named
Fletcher Hodges.
Fletcher Hodges.
He said he'll be easy to spot. He'll be wearing a pith helmet and a grass skirt. And I went, okay. And we arrive at the Adventurers Club, and Graham is standing outside. Graham, why were you outside?
I was looking for you for one thing.
Yeah.
They said you were coming, and we often worked out in front of the club trying to get people in anyway.
Okay.
But I was looking for you.
So Graham accompanies us, and he grants us. He escorts. He greets us, escorts us in, and I said to him in a low voice, "Hold on." I said, "My name is Peter. Bill Shepard said I should talk to you." And Graham said, "Yes, I know. Everything's prepared." And I was really relieved about that. And I said, "Can you tell me where the men's room is?" Which, I didn't really have to know because I knew where it was.
Uh-huh.
And Graham says, "Why, I'll take you there myself," which got an extremely strange look from Gwen. The hell's up with that?
Yeah, it's like if he doesn't know where the restroom is, there's something wrong.
Oh, she wanted to know why he was so anxious to accompany me to the restroom. That was what she was wondering.
It is a pith helmet. So.
We go downstairs, and Graham escorts me through a door that is cast only. And the first thing he says, Graham, do you remember the first thing you said?
I said, first of all, we're all fans.
You said, "My name is Graham Murphy,
yeah.
and I'm a huge fan of your work, and indeed, everyone here was a fan. And I have never been so relieved to be surrounded by fans." And he told me what the setup was going to be, that we were going to they were going to do the radio show in the library.
Uh-huh.
And then we were going to come out, and the Colonel was going to come to life and do the script.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, we went in, and the girls thought that the show in the library was really hysterical. And then we go out, and the Colonel comes to life and starts interacting with Kathleen. Now, the little wrinkle in this was that my sister Beth and her husband decided to go down to Disney World at the exact same time that we were there. And you didn't know this, Graham?
I guess I'd forgotten.
And she and Kathleen arranged that they were going to meet at the Adventurers Club to surprise me. So we now have two surprises going on at the same time, in which Kathleen is the victim of one and the co-conspirator of another. So the Colonel is doing my script, and I'm waiting for my cue, which is I'm going to pull out the engagement ring. And suddenly a voice behind me says, "Hey, aren't you Peter David? I'm a huge fan." And I'm, "Oh, Christ, not now." And I look, and it's my sister. And they're both standing there grinning. And now all of a sudden my attention is split, because if I'm looking at her instead of standing there with the ring, I'm going to throw everything out of whack. So I grab her by the side of the head, I pull her over, "Just listen." And I release her and turn back to Kathleen just as the Colonel gets to the point where he says, he has something for you, dear. He has an engagement ring. And I pull out the engagement ring. And everyone in the Adventurers Club suddenly realizes something genuine is happening. Mm-hmm. And the entire place burst into applause. And he finished the thing where he says, Peter wants to know if you will become his husband, his wife, and stepmother to his 3 lovely daughters. And we want to remind you not to be an evil stepmother, because we all know what happens then. So what do you say, Kathleen? And she turned to me and she said very softly, yes. And I said, tell him. And she went to the Colonel and said yes, and everybody in the place cheered. And Graham was overhead videotaping it. And,
Not for public.
oh no, it's Graham
Years
video.
ago.
Yeah, years ago.
And also the place is shut
The club's gone. I mean, no one's going to care. And he's videotaping it. And Graham shouts down, it would have sucked if she said no. Yeah. What would have sucked?
Yes. As a matter of fact, Peter, Emily and I are off to meet the man who was the Colonel. We're going to see Carl and Don.
Some minutes later, a guy comes over to me and he says,
I
know, a guy comes over to me and he says, I'm the Colonel. And I went, what? He says, my name is Carl Oxtad and I operated and voiced the Colonel. I just posted your fiance. Please give him my regards.
I sure will. We're going to have a driveway cocktail party.
Is what?
A driveway cocktail party, social distancing cocktail party in his driveway.
When is the park opening?
No comment.
They think around the 11th or 15th. And Equity shows a little bit later. They're still in negotiations.
Okay. Well, look, Broadway shut down for the rest of the year.
Until January.
January, yeah, it's done.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that Broadway's.
No trains.
Yeah. So they're being really strict about that. Are you guys staying healthy? I mean, my understanding is that it's
We're
back
talking
up.
to fans.
We're doing well. We're staying healthy. Child Emily is doing well. Caroline's looking good. I saw her walking back there. And,
Yep.
Hi. But we're going to take off. We just wanted to pop in and tell you that we love you and that we miss you, and we hope you're doing well.
Great seeing you in regards to Carl and Nora.
See you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so
we're all friends here.
the whole
Yeah, I was about to say, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to give that treat to them because they haven't spoken. You folks gotta understand, like David's come down to my part of the world, Orlando, quite on a religious schedule. So I take Disney for granted. This is my backyard and sometimes my job. And for them, though, this is their at least 2 to 3 times a year. So
yeah, well, not this year we're not, unfortunately.
yeah, dude.
But so the Hulk, so
Right.
comes in. And he says, would you be interested in writing the Hulk? And I said, and I wasn't reading the book at the time. And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I think dialogue is my strength. And I really don't know what I can do with a character who basically has a vocabulary of about 8 words. And he said, oh, no, that's not the Hulk now. And I went, what do you mean? And he said, Al Milgrom made him gray. I said, what? He said, it restored him to his original. There we are.
Mm-hmm.
He's restored him to his original incarnation, and so he's gray and he's intelligent, just as it was in the original Hulk. Which is why it always breaks me up nowadays when people say to me, "What made you change the Hulk back to gray?" And the answer is nothing. Al Milgrom did that. And he said, Rick Jones is now the Hulk, the Green Hulk.
That's right.
And I went, well, that's stupid. Rick Jones should be like the one normal guy in the entire Marvel universe. This, of course, was years before A-Bomb.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I said, well, if I come on the book, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of Rick Jones being the Hulk and focus on the Gray Hulk. And he said, oh, that's fine. You can do whatever you want. And I said, aren't you worried that you're going to get blowback from editorial? I mean, I said, let's be honest. Nobody wanted me on Spider-Man. Aren't you worried about getting the same kind of pushback? And Bob said, no, there's not going to be any problem at all. Nobody wants to write the Hulk. I went, what do you mean nobody wants to write the Hulk? And Bob said, I have gone to every available writer. No one wants to write the book. I've even gone to every editor who writes on the side. No editor wants to write it. I have absolutely no one to write the book. If you don't write it, I'm going to have to write it. And I don't want to write it.
Mm.
And I went, well, what's wrong with having Al continuing to write it? And he said, well, I'm not really thrilled with the storyline in which Al wants to take it. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, Al wants to do a series of stories that have a framework in which they're one-off stories in which the Rick Jones Hulk goes through some sort of adventure in which he winds up learning something, and there's a moral at the end of every episode. Kind of like early episodes of South Park.
Yeah.
Before South Park.
Or the original Hulk TV series.
Or the original Hulk TV
Yeah.
series. He says, and the framing device is going to be that there is this talking mule speaking with a sentient acre of grass. And they're the ones who are having the conversation about the Hulk. And the names of the characters are Wiseacre and Smartass. And I'm sitting there going, you're kidding. And he says, no, that's what Al wants to do. And I said, I think I see the problem here. I mean, Al tended to think outside of the box, way outside of the box, like, back in the manufacturer on the factory floor setting. And I said, yeah, I think I see the problems here. I think Mike there. And so I said, okay, I will come up with a storyline and I'll write the book for 6 issues.
Yeah.
12 years later.
But say,
Who knew?
and that the fact that you took that gig that nobody wanted and you turned it into I don't know where it has settled at, but the whole point of the matter is that everybody who was cool was reading Hulk. That's really what it was.
Well, let's go backwards. So on Spider-Man, you did the death of Jean Dewolff.
Yes, I did.
And Al.
That was Jim Owsley's idea. Owsley wanted to kill off Jean Dewolff. I have no idea why. I don't know what Jean ever did to him. But
she would go on a date with him.
Yeah, she would go on a date with him. He wanted to kill off Jean Dewolff, and he wanted me to write the storyline. He wanted me to write something dark and gritty. I mean, nowadays people think of Peter David, the humorous writer, but I first got my start writing very dark, grim, and gritty. I mean, we were trying to emulate Hill Street Blues in my early work, so much so that at the end of every issue, we would have there you are. Yeah. We would have the credits would be white printing on black background, like they always did at the end of Hill Street.
Yeah.
So, I remember reading this when it came out. It was brutal stuff. I mean, you open up those first couple of pages where it's her kind of having her life flash before her. And then you come in on the death scene.
I called it the death of Jean Dewolff because I didn't want to call it Who Killed Jean Dewolff, for the simple reason that if you're reading the story and you're thinking, gee, who killed her? It was obviously Stan Carter because there were no other suspects. I wasn't writing a murder mystery.
Yeah.
So anyone with like 2 brain cells would have figured out that it was Stan, although it was a surprise to many people because fans kind of assumed that Stan Carter was Jean's replacement in terms of Spider-Man continuity. I also did a little trick that I learned from Isaac Asimov. Not that he told me personally. What he said was, if you want to write a character who the fans will underestimate, have him speak in Yiddish word order. Instead of having him say, I'm going for a walk, you go, for a walk I'm going. Right? Because when you have people speaking in a Yiddish word order, people kind of assume that they're there just for amusement. Why the hell do you think Yoda talked that way? When Yoda first showed up on Star Wars, put your weapon. I mean, no harm. He talked like a little old Jewish guy. it didn't occur to you that this was Yoda because he talked like a little old Jewish guy. Whereas Yoda, whereas we knew that he was looking for a great Jedi warrior named Yoda. So it wasn't be this little thing that talked backwards. So I had Stan Carter as a Jewish guy talking that kind of inverted Yiddishism.
Yeah.
And it worked perfectly. Most fans really didn't realize that that Stan Carter was the bad guy just because of his verbalization. But that issue, those issues got me a lot of attention. I mean, I will still always remember when I have Spider-Man finding out that Jean Grey is dead, his reaction is the same that anybody else's would be. He goes, "She's dead?" But I just saw her the other day.
Yeah.
How can she be dead when I just saw her the other day?
Yeah.
And I had a Marvel editor who told me that I had completely written that wrong. And what Spider-Man should have yelled was, "She's dead? No!" And he should have ripped out a street light and started pounding a car with it.
Yeah.
She can't be dead. She can't. And he said that having him react the way I did completely missed the point of comic books. And I said, the point of comic books is that when someone gets bad news, they perform thousands of dollars of damage?
Yeah.
Insane.
I mean, that's super villain stuff. Dr. Doom smashes his machines when Reed Richards lives and everything else. That's not what the hero
I
does.
think this right here proves the point of how angry Peter got, how angry Spider-Man got. I mean,
The thing is, a couple of years later, I wrote a follow-up to it.
Yes.
In which Spider-Man finds out that Stan Carter has gotten out of jail. And he goes to confront Stan Carter. And he's stunned to see that Stan Carter has sustained serious damage because of the way that Spider-Man beat the living crap out of him. He's now walking with a cane. He has a stammer. He's his face is misshapen because unlike an episode of Supernatural or whatever, where they get pounded on and you don't see any sign of it later on, when someone gets the living crap beaten out of them that way, they're not just going to heal up and be exactly the same a couple of days later. I had Stan in really bad shape, and Spider-Man was totally horrified and guilt-ridden by what he's done. And he now suddenly has to go like, Jesus, I totally lost control of myself, and this guy will never be able to walk or talk properly again. It's all my fault. And Stan's going like, no, it's not your fault. I had it coming. It's okay. And Peter becomes more and more horrified as Stan tries to let him off the hook.
Yeah.
So, I really tended to stick with reality when it came to Spider-Man and the Sin Eater, even though, some editors felt that I had, missed the point of comic books. But I always missed the point of comic books. I mean, I was in Alice's office one day, and Tom DeFalco was there, and Tom was saying to me that the problem with my comic books is that I don't think about the future. Stan always talked about the illusion of change, but we can never do a final change. And Tom says, for instance, he says, I could write a really great death of J. Jonah Jameson story.
Yeah.
I could have it be that Jonah's dying, and he's dying in Spider-Man's arms, and Spider-Man reveals his identity, and Jonah and Peter finally come to terms with one another, and then Jonah dies. And he says, it would be an incredibly powerful story. But then what do you do the next issue? And without hesitation, I said, well, I'd have the Kingpin by the Daily Bugle. And he goes, what? And I said, we have the Kingpin by the Daily Bugle. It's perfect because the entire Bugle staff is going to be going, no, we're not going to be working for this criminal. And the Kingpin is going to assemble them and say, look, this is the business. I don't care what you write. I don't care what you publish. I am never going to control editorial the way that your previous owner did. You can write whatever you want, and as long as it's accurate, and as long as the newspaper makes money, I'm never, ever going to interfere. And furthermore, I have looked at your healthcare plans, and they suck. Oh my God, you people are paying ridiculous amounts of money, and you don't have dental. I'm going to be giving you completely new health care, which is going to have a minimum, it's going to have a maximum of you pay in $100 a year, and you're going to have free full dental. And now that you got half the Daily Bugle staff going, we're still not going to work for the Kingpin. He's a criminal. And the other half is going to be going,
Dental.
Yeah. And you know what? At least it'll be better than Jameson. Because Jameson only cared about writing about how bad Spider-Man was. And now you're going to have Peter stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
Because the King was going to say, yes, you're going to have coverage. And if you have any close relatives who have coverage, they will be covered too. So now Peter's going to be going, crap, because that means Aunt May's healthcare will be covered.
Yeah.
What the hell am I going to do? And now you've got the Daily Bugle going on strike, except only half of them are striking because the other half are going, dental.
Yeah.
We're getting pay raises and we can write whatever we want to do, as opposed to the days when Jonah Jameson was making us write whatever he wanted us to. This is a better deal all around. And Peter is stuck in the middle because to cross the line and go to work so that Aunt May can continue to have, health care, or does he march with them and therefore not make any money and not have any health care? And I'm jumping up and down and going, oh my God, this is great. Owsley, we need to kill off Johnny. And poor Tom's going, no, okay, you're clearly not getting it. And Owsley's going, that's really not a bad idea. And DeFalco's going, no, it's and
sort of like your adamantine mistake.
Oh yeah. I was at an X meeting. And we were talking, in those days, we had all the writers for all the books getting together. And we were planning a big fight of Magneto versus Wolverine. And how's that going to go? And I said out loud, if I'm Magneto, why am I even bothering to fight Wolverine? He's got an adamantium skeleton. I just rip his skeleton out of his body. Let's see if we go from that. And the other writers and the editors look at each other and go, my God, that's a great idea. I went, no, it's not. And they went, yeah, it is. It's great. I said, are we killing Wolverine? And they said, no. He has a healing factor. I said, a healing factor? You're ripping out his skeleton. How the hell could you possibly heal from that? He's going to be a healed puddle of goo on the floor. He would have no skeleton to re-heal. This is a terrible idea. And they wound up doing it anyway. They had
bone claws.
Yeah, and they wound up getting bone claws. Bone claws? What the hell are bone claws? I mean, no.
Oh, seems like you're idle music.
So the joke, the thing that I would counter with DeFalco is, yes, Stan said about the illusion of change later on.
Right.
But if you go back to those first 100 issues of FF, those first 50 issues of Spider-Man, those first 100 issues, 50 issues of the Avengers,
right? It's
constant change. Peter graduating high school, Peter going to college, Gwen Stacy dying, the Avengers splitting up, and then you get Cap's Kooky Quartet, and then you bring in more Avengers, and then
Reed and Sue get married. Reed and Sue have a kid.
Yeah.
Who's been 8 years old for 40 years.
Right. And they're at a certain point in time, yes, he puts the brakes on it in the 70s and goes, okay, we've had enough change.
Yeah.
But the first 10 years of the Marvel Universe are all change. It's chaotic.
Right. As opposed to the DC universe, it was pretty much static until they finally started changing things, because they saw how successful Marvel was.
So you're doing the Hulk. You did Spider-Man. Then you're writing a column for Comics Buyer's Guide.
Yes.
I digress.
Correct.
Jude, bring that stuff up. How did that come about? How did Don and Maggie get you to do that?
What happened was somebody, to this day, I do not know who, wrote into Don and Maggie and said, "You should give a regular opinion column to Peter David." And Don and Maggie ran the letter and said, "Sounds good to us, Peter." And they did it without freaking telling me. And the way that I found out about it was my phone started ringing off the hook from people going, "Hey, are you going to write a new column for Comic Buyer's Guide?" And I went, "What? Am I writing a what?" And that's where it happened. Like I said, to this day, I have no idea who thought it would be a good idea. But I came up with "But I Digress," which just seemed to be a good title for it. Yeah, there it is. In which I would wind up talking about pretty much anything that was going on in the world at that particular point in time. And I was really kind of surprised that it took off the way that it did. Indeed, there are people who just knew me from my opinion column. Art Spiegelman, I think. Yeah? Yeah, Art Spiegelman. He said, "Peter David, who writes But I Digress?" I went, "Yeah." He didn't know anything else that I did, but he knew But I Digress.
And there are people who subscribe to Comics Buyer's Guide specifically to read your column.
Apparently so. It was easily one of those popular columns because I could pretty much talk about whatever the hell I wanted to talk about.
I read it before we met. That's
Oh, you did?
Oh yeah, because I was working at the comic book shop at the time.
Yeah, it's true.
And we would get it in, and I would read it.
Yeah, they always put it. They wound up putting it in the same place in the newspaper, in the back, in the same way that when you go to a supermarket, they always put eggs and milk in the back of the store because everyone wants to get eggs and milk. So you have to walk through the store and look at all the other stuff to get back there. Same principle. Put it in the back of the paper. They have to look at all the other stuff.
And for our audience, to give you a little historical context, the Comic Buyer's Guide, the CBG, was before the internet existed and the news websites and CBR, Bleeding Cool, whatever. The CBG was it. The CBG was a weekly, bi-weekly, depending on the schedule, but it was up to the news. It was
Patty, it was weekly, and you had to pay extra to get it shipped to you earlier than other people if you wanted it. So, because I, had always bought and sold books, I was a dealer. If you paid a premium, you would get it a day or two earlier than the rest of the world would get it because they would get it regular mail, and I would get mine express mailed or whatever it was, so that I could get it because people were putting in there. People were selling collections, people were selling art, people were selling books, and it was a buyer's guide. It was pre-eBay. It was it was the only way, other than conventions or in a store, that you could find stuff, and people were selling those classifieds. And if you didn't get it early, you didn't get that stuff.
Yeah. And retailers would get a copy for themselves. They would not sell it. They did not want their customers to have the information that was in it.
Yeah, I can believe it.
I sold it in my stores because I didn't care. I would sell copies. I would get them. But you're right. There were stores that were, this was verboten. You don't share that.
This was how they would impress her. Well, I've heard that DC and Marvel could do a crossover, and Peter David might be writing it. They would use this. This would be their egress of knowledge for the fans. And of course, the letter columns were.
I got mine.
And of course, the letter columns were famous for the proto flame wars between professionals. Oh, yeah. And you got into a few fracases yourself. you and the Image guys could do it another time. But the whole fact of the matter, it wasn't just you. There was lots of disagreements between professionals going on, and that was the popcorn, read, and watch. And that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember there was this whole blow up about who created Venom.
Oh yeah. There was,
and I mean, I know exactly who created Venom. It was David Michelinie.
Yeah.
I know this because I was at a Spider Writers meeting, and David said, "Okay, I want to run something past you. We're going to be bringing back the black and white costume, and I'm going to have him take over this character named Eddie Brock." Now, a lot of people forget that Eddie Brock actually tied in with the Stan Carter Sin Eater storyline. And David wanted to make sure that that was okay with me, since I was the one who written the Sin Eater. And I said, sure. And I said, what's going to be this character's name? And he goes, Venom. I went, ooh, good name. So yeah, David Michelinie created him. Did Todd design the costume? No, Todd didn't design the costume. He gave him teeth and a tongue. Huzzah. But there's way more to the character than teeth and a tongue.
Yep.
No, it's the Black Spider-Man suit that had been around since Amazing Spider-Man 252 or the Marvel Team Up issue, whatever you want to say, hit the stands first. But it wasn't a new concept. It was, let's just take the suit that's sitting in a jar, and put it on somebody else.
Yeah, and making it a villain was a great twist. The symbiote hated Spider-Man, and Brock hated Peter. He was the first villain that actually hated Peter Parker as opposed to Spider-Man. Flash Thompson doesn't count.
Yeah. And the Image guys hated, but I digress, because I criticized Image. Of course, I criticized Marvel and I criticized DC. The point of the column was to be critical when people did things or said things that were stupid, that I thought were stupid. And the thing that was hilarious was that all the stuff that I critiqued Image about, I turned out to be right. I mean, they were going, we're not going to have a single spokesman. Everyone is going to be spokesman for Image Comics. And I said, that's ridiculous. You need to have one person be your spokesman. You need to speak with one voice. And eventually they had Jim Lee be their spokesman. They said, we're a group of friends working together. We all love each other. And I said, a group of friends working together. Yeah, I sure hope you have all your lawyers paid up, because a group of friends working together is how it always begins, and then it falls apart. And they said, I have no idea what I was talking about. And Rob Liefeld was one of my biggest critics, up until the point where they wound up throwing Rob Liefeld out of Image. There was one other thing I said that I remember that I now can't recall what it was. But everything that I said about Image turned out to be borne out by what they said and what they did.
And you're absolutely right. You criticized everybody.
Yeah,
you absolutely did. And there were some other ones that like I remember, like the older generation was like, yeah, he goes at everybody. I mean, but the whole point of the matter is they were the superstars at the time, so you were the only person basically calling out their follies.
No, there was one other person, John Byrne. It's
true.
One of the few times in comic book history where John and I were completely on the same page.
Well, I remember the back cover of your collection, Did I Digress, that he did there.
I approached him about doing the back cover of the thing. And he said his only question was, who's doing the front cover? I think he's expected it was Todd. And there was no way that he was going to do the back cover if Todd was on the front. And it was a very big secret. And I said, if I tell you, you cannot tell anyone. And he said, agreed. And I said, Neil Gaiman. And he went, okay, I can live with doing the back cover if Neil Gaiman's doing the front.
And we have that piece of art.
We actually have the original artwork that Neil Gaiman did.
He did it Sharpie on blackboard.
Yeah, it hangs in our bedroom.
Yeah.
Cool.
A Neil Gaiman original. wait, he's a writer, not an artist. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's why I like the idea. I mean, I knew that Neil could draw.
Yeah.
And that's why I like the idea of having Neil do it, because who the hell would suspect that Neil Gaiman is going to be the cover artist? And I think it's a terrific job.
No, it did, and it's certainly. And again, you're an honest man in a lot of crazy, turbulent times, and I thought it was brave because again, you poked at Marvel, you poked at DC, but you were still drawing paychecks from them.
Yeah, and the thing is that they knew I was being honest, and they knew I was being even-handed. I mean, part of it was that did I have behind the scenes knowledge of what was going on? Yes, but I never used that. I never wrote about
very, very, very careful about that.
Sure.
I never wrote about things that I knew simply because I was a behind the scenes guy.
Yeah.
I always responded to what they were doing publicly. If they did something publicly that was dumb, or you know what? You said it publicly, you should have thought about it before. And I really didn't wind up having any problems with it. And these are from the guys that I was drawing a paycheck from.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, you were at the forefront of when they did the experimental. You vote on the winner, DC and Marvel versus DC crossover.
Well, actually, that almost got me fired.
Really?
Yeah. Joe Quesada was not happy with the fact that I was openly challenging them over their decision to raise Captain Marvel's cover price. Because my attitude was, I had planned what I thought would be really new and exciting storyline. And they were going to jack the price up. And I was not thrilled about that. And I publicly stated, I wrote an open letter to Joe Quesada. And I said, this is a bad idea. Because if you increase the price on Captain Marvel, you are basically sending a message to the fans that you're going to be canceling this book. They're going to stop reading it just at the point where I'm trying to get them to come on board. I said, if you're going to raise the price of 10 to 15 cents on something, why not raise the prices on the X books? The fans of the X books will not care about paying an additional 10 or 15 cents. It won't affect the sales of the X books at all and will indeed make you more money, as opposed to the people who will stop reading Captain Marvel because you're raising that 25 cents. And Joe was initially not thrilled with this, and he was really pissed off about it. But then he realized that what I was doing was using the same tactics that he and Bill Jemas were doing, because he and Bill Jemas were constantly taking shots at people in public venues.
Mm-hmm.
So he realized that I was doing what he and Bill were doing, and he really could not in good conscience punish me for doing what he and Bill were doing. So Joe contacted me and said, I want to do this thing called You Decide. I want to start Captain Marvel over again, and we're going to keep it at the same price. And we're going to do a thing called a You Decide, in which we're going to come out with 3 books. Yours, one called Marvel that Bill Jemas is going to write, and a third one, the name of which I'm forgetting now.
That's the one Quesada did.
And yeah, one that Quesada is going to do. And fans will decide which book is going to stay around.
It had to do with sales.
It had to do with sales.
Straight up sales.
Straight up sales. So all 3 will be published for 6 issues, and then the 2 that are not as well selling will be canceled. And I thought, okay. And he said, and let's do a thing where
it was Ultimate Adventures.
Right. Right, Ultimate Adventures. And he said, I will do a thing where if you wind up with the book getting canceled, you have to go in a dunk tank. And I went, no. Because I had already felt burned from the Todd McFarlane.
And the chicken suit.
The Todd McFarlane, that chicken suit debate fiasco. So he said, No. I'm not going to get involved in any kind. You want to do publicity for you decide, that's fine, but I'm not going to participate in a dunk tank. And Joe said, fine, he understood. And they launched You Decide. And some people really thought that my initially attacking Marvel was all part of You Decide. No, it wasn't. Definitely was not.
They flipped it.
It was me putting myself out on a branch, and Quesada could have cut the branch off behind me, but he did not. And we came out with the 3 books, and Marvel remains to this day probably one of the worst received comic books Marvel has ever put out, because Bill Jemas could not write his way out of a paper bag. It was just awful. If you go look at Wikipedia will go, Marvel, the worst comic book series Marvel ever produced. Which
and it didn't even make it 6 issues.
It did not even. No, it made it 6 issues.
Oh, it did?
Well, the 6th issue is basically essays.
Huh.
But it was just unbelievably bad. And
The last issue is submission guidelines for the Epic Comics line.
oh god,
Yeah, that's right.
Jeez, I knew that the last one wasn't even a comic book. Yeah, so it was just absolutely ghastly. And Ultimate Adventures tanked too. And Captain Marvel went for like 20 issues or something before sales started to diminish again, at which point they just canceled it. But hey, I got 20 issues out of it.
You got 20 issues out of it. So before that, let's go back a little while. You worked on Star Trek DC. We're going to go through the Guardian. We're going to go through Harlan's Guardian.
Okay.
And go back to when you did when you worked on Star Trek.
Okay.
You wrote what is arguably, you wrote one of my favorite Star Trek stories, which was the Scotty Annual.
Jimmy loved that issue.
Yeah.
Jimmy loved that issue. I got the idea from when I went to see a Harold Pinter play. I believe it is. Do you remember the name of the play? Betrayal?
Yeah.
In which Pinter basically told the story backwards.
Yep.
The first act or the first scene was essentially the last scene of the play. And he winds up then going backwards to the very beginning of the characters' meeting. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to do a Star Trek annual in that format? Which is why I credited Harold Pinter in that particular book.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is that had fans going, Harold Pinter's writing Star Trek comics now?
We probably could have.
Interestingly enough, Jimmy wound up introducing me to an old friend of his who had the same name as the woman who was his great love in that comic book.
Wow.
So he loved that issue. He read it, he thought it was absolutely terrific. And yeah, I have very fond memories. That's also, if I'm recalling correctly, the first comic that I ever wrote that I wrote full script.
Oh.
Because Kurt Swan drew that one.
Yeah. Yeah, Kurt Swan.
Kurt Swan was used to drawing books from full scripts. You see, DC Comics always did full scripts.
Right, DC guy.
And Marvel did what's called the Marvel style. But Kurt was not comfortable with the idea of coming up with all the storytelling himself. And he asked if I could write it full script. And that was my first endeavor to write something full script. And I indeed was quite pleased with the way it came out.
As well, yeah.
And you said Jimmy liked the story.
Jimmy loved when people brought him that issue to sign. He adored it. And like I said, he loved the fact that the woman had the same name as a former flame of his.
So you clearly, when you were working on the book, had a love of Star Trek.
Of course.
You had an affinity for the characters.
Yeah.
I know that you struggled with some of the, I guess, the licensing guys on the Paramount side.
One guy. A guy who shall go nameless, Richard Arnold. who did everything he could to make my life a living hell in the comic book, and in the novels too, for that matter. Richard. My problems with Richard stemmed from when I first got together with him for breakfast at a convention, when I was first starting to write the comic books. And Richard told me that he thought that the Gold Key Star Trek comics were the ideal Star Trek comics.
Come on.
And I laughed in his face.
Stop it.
Because I thought he was kidding. And then I realized he was completely serious.
Stop it.
Yeah.
No, he's not kidding.
I'm not kidding, dude. That's what he said. And our relationship kind of went downhill from there.
I'm amused by those Gold Key stuff.
Yeah, God.
I'm amused by it.
No, but they get artists drawing stuff. They had never seen the
They watched the show, yeah.
And they're working off
They know what Scotty looked like. Scotty was a sandy blonde looking guy.
The Enterprise would go hurtling across the sky with jet engine exhaust coming out from the nacelles.
I think it landed at one point.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I mean, how the hell would the Enterprise land?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, he really hated my work on the comic books. And his criticisms were insane. I introduced a character named R.J. Blaze to be a female nemesis for Kirk, when they wind up becoming romantically involved because, you know, of course.
It's Kirk.
It's Kirk. And Richard hated that. And he said, and these were his words, Kirk is no longer interested in women. Yeah, that was my reaction.
Come on.
I had
even Caroline's like, what?
I would give the characters thought balloons.
Who needs some?
I would give him. I would have the characters with thought balloons, and he wanted them out because he said our characters don't think.
Come on.
I had one comic, or no, I think it was a novel, where Riker's, it was a novel, where Riker says, in regards to an unwanted duty, I would rather walk patrol on the neutral zone in my underwear. And Richard rejected that line. He said, we have not established that our characters wear underwear.
So change the line to walk naked.
Yeah, I'd rather walk naked. That was okay.
Was Richard the guy who was also blocking you on the Q-in-Law adaptation? Oh, yeah. Mike, have you heard this story?
No, blocking him on the what?
Oh, on Q-in-Law?
Okay.
No.
I wrote a novel called Q-in-Law.
Yes, I'm familiar. Yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't assume. And we sent the manuscript off to Richard.
Okay.
Normal manuscript reply time is 2 weeks. 3 weeks went by. 4 weeks went by. We're not getting anything from Richard. The editor wrote to him and said, you know, this is before email. So he was faxing stuff to Richard. What's going on? We need to hear about Q-in-Law. No response. It's now February. We'd sent it to him in September or October. It's now February. Richard was going to be I was at a Creation Con, and Richard was there too.
Well, hold that thought. Richard, I remember him being at all those cons, Creation Cons, Volcons.
Yeah.
Because the one thing Richard loved was to be a celebrity at these cons.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
It was very important that Richard be at these Star Trek conventions. That is my very limited experience with Richard Arnold, the star of the Star Trek convention, much bigger than Leonard Nimoy or William Shatner. And
so I had my time up on the stage, and you have to understand there are like 2,000 people in this grand ballroom.
Yep.
And I decided to read an excerpt from Q-in-Law, knowing full well that Richard was in the audience. And I read the scene where Q is fighting Loxana Troy.
Sell tickets.
And she's beating the living crap out of him. And it's a scene that everyone remembers because Riker says, she's beating the living stuffing out of him. What do we do? And Worf says, sell tickets. And the audience was roaring. They just freaking loved it. Richard is in the back of the room steaming. Monday morning, a fax shows up at Simon & Schuster that says, authors can no longer read excerpts from unapproved manuscripts at conventions. Furthermore, Q and Law is at this point not an approved manuscript. This book is an insult to Star Trek. My editor goes, how is it an insult to Star Trek? No answer. It's now April. The book is supposed to come out in September. We still don't have it approved. They haven't sent it to typesetting because we don't have an approved manuscript. We do have a cover. There's going to be a convention nearby my house called Icon. It was a convention that was held at Stony Brook University. And Major was going to be a guest there. I said to the editor, I want you to send me a clean copy of the manuscript and the cover proof. I'm going to give it to Major Barrett. I'm not going to tell her that Richard's holding it up. I'm going to say that I want her input on how I handle Lwaxana. It was not unprecedented. I got Marina's input on for Strike Zone.
For Strike Zone.
So I said I'm going to ask her for her advice on how I handle Lwaxana. And he says, "You realize if she hates it, we're dead." I said, "We're dead now anyway." Okay, and he sent me a clean copy and the book cover flap. So I bring it to her at her table. And I said, I introduced myself and I said, I want to show you the manuscript for an upcoming book of mine. I thought you might like the cover. And she's on the cover. There we go. And she looked at it and she says, I'm on the cover. I said, yes, you are. You're a major character. She says, I haven't been on the cover of a book since 1991 or whatever it was. And I said, I'd really like it if you could read it and tell me what you think. And here's my phone number and all that stuff. And she said, I will absolutely get in touch with you. And she read it on her flight home. Now, we had spies at Paramount. So we found out that Monday morning, she comes into the Star Trek offices raving about this new book that Pocketbook is going to be publishing called Q and Law. And this is a wonderful story. Indeed, it should be adapted into an episode. And she wanders by Richard's office and she says, Richard, have you read this wonderful new manuscript called Q and Law? And Richard says, why no? I haven't read it yet, Major, but I'll get right on it, says the guy who's been holding it up for half a year. He then winds up sending a fax. Oh, then Major calls me and proceeds to tell me everything she loves about this book. She has no criticism of it whatsoever. So then Richard sends a 3 to 4 page fax, single space, with all the stuff that he wants changed. And he managed to psychically hit every single thing that Major loved. And we went through, and on most of them, like 90% of them, I hand wrote, oh no, Major loved that part. That's staying in. I wound up changing a couple of very, very minor things. But otherwise, the book saw print almost exactly the way that it was supposed to. So, thank God for Major Barrett. And indeed, Pocketbooks wound up doing an audio of Q and Law. It was read by John Delancey and Major Barrett. What? Okay, hold on. My wife keeps telling me to drink water. Now, the thing is, we did the recording. We sent it off to Paramount for approval. And Paramount comes back and they say, you can't release this. And Simon Schuster goes, why not? And they said, you have a license for having an audio reading of a book. That means having one actor reading the book. Here you have 2 actors interacting in character. So this transcends having be a recording. This now is a dramatization.
Oh,
That's a totally different license. You can't release this because it's a dramatization. And Pocketbook said, okay, we will re-record it entirely with John Delancey, and you can explain to Gene Roddenberry's widow why she was dropped from the recording. And Paramount came back and said, okay, you know what? Just don't do it again. And that's how we managed to get the release of Q-in-Law out there. But it was more or less done over Richard's dead body. And indeed, I mean, Richard was there up until Gene passed away.
Yeah.
And the thing was that Richard was back in Gene's glory. He didn't realize that that was all that it was. And when Gene passed away, Richard was gone within 24 hours. They came to his office, they informed him he was fired, and the Paramount guards stood there and watched him pack up his office and made sure that he didn't take any Star Trek memorabilia with him. And they escorted him off the lot. I wish I could have been there. That would have been terrific. But yeah,
Oh man.
got Q-in-Law published.
Bless her soul.
Yeah, bless her.
Because it's the book when we met over a puppet.
Yeah.
I made a set of Klingon puppets, including Ralph the Klingon puppet. Peter was doing something at a convention called Mystery Trekkie Theater.
Yes.
And he needed a puppet for it, and so I bought one of the Klingons. And it came with a half-hour lesson, because I can teach anybody how to operate a hand and rod puppet in about half an hour. So I'm teaching him, and I'm teaching his daughter.
Oh no, you forget the convention people.
Oh yeah, the convention committee came up to me and said, "Peter David bought your puppet." I was like, "Great!" It comes with a half-hour lesson, and I was the stage manager at the time, so I had a limited window when I could do it because I had a show that night. So we worked out. I taught him and Shayna the basics on operating.
Shayna is my eldest
daughter. You know, the basics on operating a hand puppet. Shayna had it down, so I figure anything that Peter didn't pick up, Shayna would teach.
Right.
So I say goodbye, you know, very, very nice people and all the rest. And so I do my show. I get home at like 3:00 in the morning, and I had a bookshelf in my room, and it had my favorite Star Trek books are on the top, and I see Q-in-Law, Peter David, and I go, that Peter David.
Yeah.
Oh man. And for our audience, to let you know, Kathleen is indeed a fantastic puppeteer, a fantastic maker of puppets. She has come to every time she's come to our shows, she usually has a puppet of a version of one of the guests that she presents it to. And I think you've done it.
Seen quite a few doctor puppets.
Yep.
Yeah.
And companions. I've done a lot of different puppets. Neil's got 4. He's got 4, including he has Sandman, he has Dream, he has Death, and he has Destiny. And then I made a puppet of him, which I've used for storytelling.
Good.
No, you go ahead.
The best was when she did a puppet of David Tennant as the Doctor. And I was going to be attending a Wizard or Creation Con.
Wizard.
I was going to be attending a Wizard Con where he was going to be at, and she asked me if I could get it to him. And I managed to arrange it with the Wizard folks because David Tennant was going to have a huge line.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to spend 3 hours away from my table standing on line to give him this puppet. So they arranged they were going to bring me straight over to him. So they come to me and they say, okay, we're going to bring it to David Tennant now. I went, fine. So I follow them, and they bring me past this line of about, and this is no exaggeration, about 1,000 people.
Yeah, because David usually gets about 1,000
right.
people. Here,
And
forward for a second.
okay. And I bring him the puppet, and the thing is, what do you got? Okay.
No, I'm sorry, Crowley. No, you can tell the story.
So I bring it now. His handlers are clustering around him because they figure I'm not going to be spending any money, which is true enough. So they want to minimize the amount of time I'm going to be talking to him. So I bring him the puppet, and I said, David, I'd like to give you this puppet. My wife made it for you. And he sees the puppet, and he's delighted. And he takes it off, and he starts playing with the puppet. I said, yes, my wife's name is Kathleen David. I'm her husband, Peter. And he looks up at me, and he says, Peter David? And I went, yeah. And he said, Peter David, the comic book writer? And I went, yeah. And he says, I love your work on the Hulk.
Get out.
I'm stunned. And I turn to the 1,000 people and I go, David Tennant's a fan of mine. And everyone cheered, which I thought was hilarious.
That's amazing.
Later, I wound up meeting Peter Davison. And I said to him, your son-in-law is a big fan of mine. And he looked at me and said, he's a fan of yours? Because he thought I had misspoken. And I went, yeah, I know that actually sounds kind of weird, but yeah, he's a fan of mine. Kathy, you're out of camera. There you go. Okay. So yeah, the concept that David Tennant is a fan of my work just
incredible.
Well, we hosted David last November in Minneapolis. It was a virtual one that he did like this for a live audience that we had, and he said he's like, you can't see it, but over there I got all my Marvel trades and all my he's got a whole Marvel trade collection and. Just went up about it, and yeah, so absolutely, it's he's one of us.
Yeah. One of us.
Yes. Patty had a lovely conversation the other day we had Colin Baker, Paul McGann, and Sylvester McCoy.
And look, I will always remember whenever we go to Dragon Con, we always have what's called Rib Night. Patty, you've been to it.
Oh, yes, I have. Thank you very much. Looking forward to it again someday.
Someday. Yeah. The last Rib Night we have, Walter Koenig was there. Walter Koenig was there, and Walter and Joel Hodgson asks me if I can introduce Walter Koenig to him. And I'm thinking to myself, how did I reach this point in my life where I've got freaking Joel Hodgson asking me to introduce him to Walter Koenig?
Which he did.
Which I did. I mean, I've had things like, many years ago when Phantom Menace came out, the original Star Wars was later called Episode 4. TBS. When I saw it was just called Star Wars.
Yeah, TBS was showing it.
TBS put it into high rotation. And I was channel flipping, and I came across Star Wars, and I thought, God, I haven't actually watched this in ages. Excuse me, sorry.
Was it?
So an Ara was sitting there, and I said, let's watch Star Wars. So we're sitting there watching Star Wars, and we got to the Battle of the Death Star, and the phone rings. And I answer the phone, and the voice says, hi, Peter, it's Mark Hamill. And I went, Mark, hi, I'm watching you about to blow up the Death Star. And he says, I can call back. And I went, no, it's okay. I've seen this movie before.
Do you mind? I'm watching Star Wars.
Yeah. And, but I thought to myself, how has my life taken this weird turn? And I'm watching Star Wars and freaking Luke Skywalker calls me. I mean, this is just so odd. I'm at George Takei's wedding, and Harlan Ellison is sitting next to me.
Yeah, we had to keep you boys in line.
Yeah. I mean, there was just so much oddness in my life, and yet it's become kind of normal.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time where it was after the Julie Schwartz memorial ceremony. Julie passed away. Yeah. And Neil and I were walking down the street talking. And walking in front of us was Kathleen and
Paul Levitz.
And
no,
Neil
we were behind you. You guys were in front.
Oh, okay.
Because I saw what happened.
And this guy in a business suit goes walking past Neil and I, and his head snaps around, and he looks at Neil and me, and his jaw drops. He either recognized Neil or me, or Neil and me together. And he became so distracted that he walked right into a lamppost.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Hey, boy.
Paul and I were seeing him. We were giggling, and the two of them turned around, and we said, "We'll tell you later."
Yeah, I mean,
Oh God, Peter, I know you got an appointment in the morning. So I'll tell you what. No, I'll tell you what. You've got them. You got a Maestro project coming out. The Maestro, the character you created, an evil future version of the Hulk with all the strength, all of the Hulk strength, all of Banner's intelligence, and all the dark side of that. Tell us about that project and when we might be seeing it.
You know what? I don't know what the ship date is off the top of my head, but basically
It's moved around a little.
It's
it's malleable. So it's on the launch pad, but there's no launch date. Is that fair?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've seen the covers. I know they're soliciting it.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything's gotten moved around thanks to COVID. But basically, Marvel approached me about the prospect of doing a Maestro limited series. And they said you can set it whenever you want to, although we'd be really interested to see basically a prequel to Future Imperfect.
It comes out in August.
Oh, it does? Okay,
Thank you.
excellent. And so we'd be interested to know how the Hulk becomes the Maestro. I said, that sounds like a really interesting idea. And I wound up writing the 5-issue. Mike, does it say who the artist is? I mean, Dan Keown is writing is drawing some
cover by Keown, variant cover by Perez, I guess Ramon Perez.
Yeah.
And
There's another.
yes, it is artist German Peralta.
Yeah, okay. I can see why I wouldn't remember the name, But he's doing a terrific job.
Oh yeah, the pages of
Absolutely
just
terrific.
gorgeous.
And I basically wound up writing a 5-issue limited series that focuses on the Maestro. And I even at one point have Rick Jones calling out the Maestro for what it actually is, because the concept behind the Maestro is very simple. There's an old saying that eventually the son becomes the father. And, that whoever we are when we start out in life, sooner or later, we become our fathers. Well, let's remember that Bruce Banner's father was Brian Banner. Basically an evil son of a bitch who tormented Bruce when he was young, to the point that he gave him what was then called multiple personality disorder. What do we call it now?
Borderline personality disorder.
No, there's another name for
Still
it.
on TV.
Whatever it is. And that the Maestro is essentially Brian Banner, that he's, this evil bastard. And we actually have Rick saying that to the Maestro or to the Hulk. This is what you become. You become your father. Oh, that's a nice cover. I hadn't seen that one yet.
Oh yeah,
that is nice. The cover I really like is a riff on the classic Jim Steranko character cover, where he's kind of bent over. But
I've seen that one.
But yeah, it's and I've actually written all 5 issues. That's already done. And I think it's going to be really terrific. I'm hoping that people like it, because I'm very pleased with the way it came out.
It's good. You're every time you go back to the character. Well, first of all, Future Imperfect, one of the all-time favorite Hulk stories, and just a great Marvel story in general. I'm usually not too fond of the dystopian stuff, but out of all of Marvel's dystopian futures, that's the one I think.
Oh, Patty, it's such a
most sense.
look. I mean, the covers, the art, the interior, the story. George is George, but incredibly inspired on that.
Well, the funny thing is, the reason George did it was because Bobby Chase was working with this Italian artist, and she was looking for a project for him. And she said, "Can you come up with a dystopian Hulk story?" And I came up with Future Imperfect. I said, let's flip City on the Edge of Forever.
Yeah, okay.
To deal with a problematic future. And the Italian artist then wound up dropping out of the project. And we originally approached Sam Keith about it. And Sam seemed interested, but not really interested enough to commit to it. And Bobby still really liked the basic premise. And then one day I happened to bring my daughter Gwen into, you know what Docs in a Box is?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, for those who don't know, a docs in a box is basically one step down from an emergency room.
Urgent care.
It's what we call urgent care. You know, doctors in a box. If your regular doctor is not available, go to docs in a box. And my daughter Gwen had scarred herself while playing with a friend. So I brought her to a local docs in a box to have her checked out. And George Perez is sitting there. And I went, George, holy crap, it's great to see you. So we're sitting there chatting. And George says, you know, I would love to work on a project with you. And I said, you know, I think I have one in mind that would be perfect. And I described it to him, and George went, oh my God, that sounds fantastic. I'm totally on board. And this is before cell phones. So when I got home, I called up Bobby Chase and I said, I've got an artist for Future Imperfect. I've already offered him the gig. And Bobby says, Peter, you can't offer an artist a gig. You don't have that authority. I have to do that. And I said, yeah, I told him to call you. And she said, well, who is it? And I said, George Perez. And she said, okay.
You are authorized to hire him.
I'm on board with that. And George did a fantastic job. I mean, you got to understand that when I write a book, a comic book, I have a mental image of what I want it to be in mind. And if the average book gets to like 70 to 80% of what I envision it to be, I'm satisfied with that. Future Imperfect is 100%. It's one of the few comic books I look at and go, it's one of the few comic books I look at and go, I cannot improve upon this in any way, shape, or form. I love what George did with Future Imperfect.
Absolutely. And you both revisited the character in the novel What Savage Beast.
We did.
And a lot of people people will talk about Future Perfect all the time. And I always first want to say, have you read the sequel novel? And they're always like, no. And like has original illustrations by George inside of it. Like, what? So yep. I'll loan out my hardcover to them. And they're like, this needs to be more well known.
Yeah, I was the publisher no longer exists. But yeah, so that kind of makes it a little bit hard to get.
Wasn't Marvel doing something?
Was. Marvel's been producing novels. They've never done a reproduction of What Savage Beast. And I think it's kind of a shame because
they should do that. And your Fantastic Four novel, which I think is brilliant. And that's another one that falls beneath the radar.
Yeah, I loved writing that. That had one of my favorite bits in that where that's it. That's the cover.
Yeah.
I love that one. Yeah, the Fantastic Four novel is one of my favorite bits in which I've got Ben Grimm walking past Yankee Stadium and someone actually manages to hit a baseball out of Yankee Stadium. And the crowd's going nuts because, oh my God. And it's from the opposing team. And it lands at Ben's feet. And Ben picks up the ball and throws it back into Yankee Stadium. And the entire crowd goes dead silent because it's like, what the hell just happened? You know, who in God's name could throw a baseball back into Yankee Stadium from outside? I really like that. Yeah, writing that FF book was a lot of fun.
And you did the impossible. You made me believe that perhaps Alicia Masters may not be the only person for Ben Grimm. You gave him that love interest. Well, it wasn't even a love interest. It was he met this girl and they bonded over baseball, not because he was a rock superhero or whatever. Right. And it's everybody. Somebody out there is interested. Check it out. This is good stuff.
Okay.
We should have you back, and we'll talk about the DC years and the independent stuff.
Okay.
and I mean, there's so much else. There's Dreadstar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Saxon Violence. I know Patty wants to talk to you about Saxon Violence.
Oh yeah.
Well, Saxon Violence was funny because I happened to write it to George as we had wrapped up Future Imperfect, and George said, I'd love to work with you on something else. And I described Saxon Violence to him, and he said, I'm on board. It was his idea to make Sax Latina. I mean, her original name was Jennifer Jean Sax. And he said, we make her Latina. And I said, fine, I'll change her name to Juanita Jean Sax. She'll still be AJ, but her first name will be Juanita. And it was great because then I could use the few Spanish curse words that I knew.
Yeah. And you did.
Patty just wants to know who she's based on.
It's somebody that George knows. George apparently likes the kinky stuff. So
we'll have to ask George.
We'll have to read George. Ask about because he's based on her as Borgnine.
Yes, that was specifically for mine. I said I wanted him to look like Ernest Borgnine. I gave George total control over Juanita, but I wanted JJ to look like Ernie. I wanted Sax to look like. I wanted Violence to look like Ernie Borgnine.
Oh, gee, yeah, you let George Perez have creative control over a female character design.
Oh yeah,
I don't know, Peter. I don't know.
Oh yeah, George did a terrific job, and I mean, I actually think I met the model that he based Juanita on.
Okay,
and I liked the characters so much, I brought them over to Fallen Angel.
That's right. That's right. I'm still hoping. I'm still hoping to see this adapted into a film or television media because I think the concept still holds up, and I think it can still happen.
Well, maybe we're going to be working on a Fallen Angel feature film.
Ooh.
So maybe Saxon Violence will show up in the feature film.
Well, like I said, would have to be back on again after a while, and let's talk about all the stuff we didn't cover because I know Mike is a huge Supergirl fan, and you certainly did the impossible with that, taking that version of Supergirl and legitimizing it.
Well, what happened was a DC.
Another time.
Oh, another time.
We'll go to that. I don't want to keep you up late. I know you got an appointment in the morning.
We really will end up going 3 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we'll talk about it now. But yes, I was a big fan of your Supergirl work because it solved a lot. It fixed a lot of the sins before you.
Well, I just say, I mean, the thing with Supergirl was when they offered me the gig, they first offered it to John Byrne, who created that version of Supergirl, and John didn't have the faintest idea what to do with her. I
run it some more.
Turned down the gig, and they brought it to me, and I'm going, so let me get this straight. She's a protoplasmic being that was created in a pocket universe with the personality of Lana Lang? What? What the hell are you talking about? I mean, she happened to look like a girl because she felt like looking like a girl, but she could just as easily be Superman or Super Dog or Super Filing Cabinet. Like, what the hell are we talking about? Which is why I came up with the idea of making her with a human being. And I picked the name Linda Danvers for a very obvious reason. And that was my philosophy behind doing what I did. And I made her an angel because I felt that was easier. When you originally described Supergirl, it's who is she? She's Superman's cousin. Okay, that's easy to understand. Now it's Supergirl. Who is she? Well, she's a protoplasmic being from a pocket universe created by an alternate version of Lex Luthor, who's with the personality of Lana Lang. No. Who is she? She's an angel. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Not simple. I mean, people claim that I made the character more complex. No, I simplified it.
You can't get more complicated. Well, and then the Crisis, and then the Time Trapper had to do this because Legion needed a Superboy, so he had to create a Superboy, and then Superman kills them because,
Yeah. Right, they were Flaming Wing, which I thought was kind of unique. I mean, the whole reason that I wrote the book the way that I did was because I said, what have the super books not done? You know, we've been having Superman and Superboy for decades upon decades. What have they not explored? And I realized that they had never explored matters of faith and spirituality. And I said, okay, that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to make a book. I'm going to write a book about faith and spirituality. That's why I had her mother being a recovering alcoholic and who found relief in God. That's why I introduced a character who was a reverend, who men of faith have told me how much they love Supergirl, because I had a reverend who was a genuine man of God who cared about people and wanted to help them and wasn't presented as a buffoon or a hypocrite or a schmuck. I did everything I could to make the book as unique to the super universe as possible. And some fans didn't get it, but a lot of fans did it. And I really did appreciate the support that I've gotten from fans. I mean, I put in a thing in there in which I came up with a new explanation as to the Garden of Eden concept, because what I put forward was the notion that if God didn't want them to eat of the fruit of the tree, why didn't he just tell them that? Why didn't he put up a wall or have a moat or just make it so high that nobody could climb it? He's freaking God. Why have it in the garden in the first place? Put it on the mountain. He could have done any number of things to guard it. But the concept was that when he said to them, don't eat from this tree, he assumed that they would not eat. Now, any parent will tell you, if you say to your kid, don't do this, under no circumstance should you do this, what's the kid going to do? He's going to do it, no matter what it is. Don't drink and drive. Kid's going to get loaded and climb behind the wheel of a car. Kids will not obey the parents. They need to find out for themselves. Any novice parent knows this. But God didn't know it because there were no parents. There was him and there were the kids. And he just figured, I'm God. If I say don't eat from it, they won't eat from it. When they ate from it, God's going, wow, I did not see that coming. That's interesting. Say something to the kid and they do the exact opposite. I had no idea, but now I know. And when God found out about it, that knowledge then got passed on to humanity. So the concept is that mankind exists so that God can learn things. And I had a rabbi come up to me and tell me that in all his reading on the Garden of Eden, no one had ever postulated that before. And he said that he was going to be taking that and presenting that at a rabbinical seminar and crediting Supergirl for giving him the idea. So I thought, okay, oh, that's pretty cool.
That works. So, Peter, you got anything else in the pipeline that you can share with us?
I'm doing another Symbiont Spider-Man.
Okay.
Which I've written that I'm very pleased with. It also has some interesting guest stars. It has Rocket Raccoon, and it has the Monica Rambeau Captain Marvel.
What's she called this week? I mean, she's still Photon now.
Yeah, in the comic book, she's called Captain Marvel because it's set at the time when she was Captain Marvel.
Ah! Nice.
Well, I love writing Symbiont Spider-Man because I get to set stuff back in the older days. I mean, fans were stunned in the very first issue of Symbiont Spider-Man when I had him fighting the human fly and we see him running across a building roof and he leaps off of the roof and we pull back and you see that he's leaping from one of the twin towers to the other twin tower. And fans were going, holy crap, okay. And we actually had to get that cleared by the lawyers. But at any rate, so I'm doing a new Symbiont Spider-Man. And I'm working on various novels. I've written one that's called Hope in Hell that I'm very pleased with. It's about a character named Hope who's in hell. So it's the most apt title I've ever written. I'm currently writing a spin-off. I'm writing a book that's based on a spin-off character from Sir Apropos of Nothing. The book is called Schlepper the Leper. So that's I'm 50,000 words into that.
Okay.
I'm also putting together a short story collection Because one day, just like about a week or so ago, I thought, I wonder how many words my various short stories, both published and unpublished, amounts to. So I started putting it all together, and within about 15, 20 minutes, I had a manuscript that was 85,000 words. I'm going, okay, we have a book. Here we go.
Yeah.
So I was very happy with that.
Awesome.
Great. Absolutely. Peter, it is always a pleasure to talk with you, and so glad that you and the family are doing well throughout our societal pause.
Yep, I still can't believe there's not. I mean, they shut down Broadway for the rest of the year.
It's insane.
The baseball seasons are going to be what, 50 games, something like that.
And a bunch of the players don't want to show up now.
Oh,
and,
really?
I know you're a baseball fan, Peter.
Yeah. To me, there's two seasons of the year. There's baseball season and there's winter. But yeah, they're theoretically going to be playing baseball, although there won't be anyone in the stadium.
Yeah.
So that really sucks.
Yeah.
But I'd be happy to go.
Yeah, I saw Washington Nationals infielder Ryan Zimmerman and pitcher Joe Ross will not play. Arizona Diamondbacks right-hand pitcher Mike Leake will not play. Colorado Rockies outfielder Ian Desmond will not play.
Any Mets players?
No Mets players that I've seen. No, I mean, come on, Mets players are men.
Let the record show you said that.
Huh?
Let the record show you.
No, I'll say it. It's, I'm a man of a certain age from Brooklyn. It's,
There you go.
The Mets were, the team in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hey, look, for me, they were the team in the 60s. I mean, I will always remember in 1969 when I was on the bus. I mean, this was back in the day when ball games were played during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the game, the last game in the World Series was going on, and no one was paying attention. The teachers gave up. Because we were just sitting there with our radios, and every 15, 20 minutes, the principal would come on the PA system and bring us up to speed with what was happening in the game. And I'll always remember I was taking the bus home. This was an actual city bus, not a school bus.
Yeah.
I was taking the bus home, and all of a sudden, the bus went absolutely nuts. Because the Mets had just won the series. And the people were going crazy. So yes, I remember that very vividly.
Oy. And I hope that someday we will look back on 2020 with that was some crazy stuff, but good thing we're all back to normal now.
Yeah, I hope so.
Indeed.
All right, so we will have to do this again.
Okay.
I'm
free tomorrow.
Okay.
Don't tempt us.
I think you want to do another one tomorrow.
I gotta do the day job till 8-ish.
All right, we'll talk about it later.
That's all. We'll do it in a few weeks. So you have some more pipeline. Maybe we can show more of the Maestro and stuff like that. So. Sure. Yeah, that'd be good. But Peter, stick around for a bit. We'll roll the credits. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us once again. This is Peter David, writer of stuff. You can see his social media stuff right there. And I'm
on peterdavid.net. I'm on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. And once again, this is what Mike and I do on Tuesday nights, and we are so glad to have you. And hey, keep spreading the links.
Absolutely.
And for God's sakes, keep washing your hands.
Jude, get us out of here.